Thanks, Red. Stondiford? Is that? I thought I'd butcher your name since you butchered my name. Teraoka is my last name. A quick shout out to everyone who helped out with this project. The National Park Service, we're in the business of providing unimpaired resources for this and future generations, and that's a very difficult mission to uphold, especially when you inherit lands that are already impaired. And Redwood National Park, certainly there we have our resource issues. This is a picture of old-growth redwood as it occurs in the upland type. This picture is taken right off the Bald Hills Road. For those of you on the field trip, we're going to be driving right by this place. And I think everyone can agree that pictures like this differ vastly from pictures like this. So this is actually what half of your Redwood National and State Parks actually looks like. So dominated by Douglas fir at extremely high densities, which cause a lot of issues, including low tree vigor and mechanical instability, and it can definitely make these stands a little more susceptible to environmental stressors. And also notice that there's nothing going on in the understory, so biodiversity tends to be very low. At Redwood National Park, we have about a 35-year history now of trying to adjust composition using thinning. Prior to 2007, we had 2 major projects equaling about 240 acres, and low thinning was always the prescribed method. And generally we're using, low thinning is the removal of trees from the lower crown classes to benefit trees in the upper crown classes. So we're cutting down small trees, trying to benefit the larger trees. And presumably we're using this to retain our largest trees. We're a national park, we're afraid to cut down large trees. And also it mimics the patterns of mortality that you would see in even age stands that are undergoing the self-thinning process. So does that seem reasonable to you guys? We're capturing mortality, we're speeding up a natural process. Let's go back in time. So these are how the stands were initiated. It's called aerial seeding. So thousands and thousands of seeds per acre were broadcast out of helicopters. This picture comes out of the National Geographic. And so clearly there is a very unnatural component to how these stands initiated. So is it fair to say let's just speed up this process, or should we be thinking about completely altering the stand's trajectory? And I have no idea what the answer is, and you're certainly not getting one today. In 2007, I had the opportunity to kind of play with the question a little bit, and we did something that was completely different to the park. So here at the A972 project, we are testing 4 different treatments. We're looking at low thinning versus crown thinning. So crown thinning is a removal of trees in the upper crown classes to benefit trees of the same crown class. So we're taking large trees to benefit adjacent large trees. And then we're using 2 different retentions, basal area retentions, a 45% retention and an 80% retention. And over time, we're trying to follow things like the changes in species composition. We're following growth. And we're also looking at understory. Are we increasing biodiversity? And for today's talk, I'm barely going to be scratching the surface of growth. So the study site is about 4 kilometers south of Oric. Site index is about 110 feet at base year 50. The stand was about 40 years old when we started the project. We laid out 20 individual units, these little squares here on the right. Each of those units is a 1/4 hectare in size, and at the center of each of those units is a 0.08 hectare monitoring plot where we measured everything, all trees greater than 10 centimeters in diameter. So I also have all the treatments listed out here. I don't know where the cursor is. And then I'm going to try to use the codes that I have there from now on, just because it's just shorter. So each of those treatments in the control we replicated 4 different times, completely randomized, and distributed to those plots. So this shows trees per hectare on the top and basal area at the bottom across time. So pre-thinning, immediate post-thinning, and 5 years after. And for the low thinnings, as one would suspect, we definitely, the thinnings were definitely more severe for the low thinnings in terms of number of trees, because we're taking a lot more smaller trees to hit the same basal area versus the crown thinning where we're taking fewer but larger trees that account for more basal area. So 5 years later, there was definitely mortality, but the mortality was pretty minor. It was mostly either blowdown or in some cases bear damage, and that was mostly in the treated areas. In the control, it was mostly competition induced. But despite mortality, there was definite increases in basal area. And so for the analysis, what we did is we looked at the percent increase of basal area from the time immediately after thinning until 2000, and then 5 years later. Okay, so we're looking at the percent increase. So, and then we put it into ANOVA. It said that there are definitely statistical significances. So the y-axis is 10%, 20%, and 30% increases in basal area. And so what it's showing us is that we followed up with the post hoc Tukey, and what it told us was C45, L45, and L80, the low thinning, they're all significantly different than the control. The L80 was really close to being significant. It was pretty borderline. I think the p-value was 0.055. So for the most part, it's different than the control. And I have no problem saying that it's different from the control, but it definitely has to be stated that it is lagging behind the rest of the treatment. So low thinning with 80% retention is definitely not doing as well. There are no differences between the 245 treatments, the crown thinning versus the low thinning, and there are no differences between the crown thinning and the low thinning at the 80% retentions. But definitely the C45 and the L45 were both significantly different than L80. So again, L80 is definitely lagging behind. We did the same analysis with Douglas fir and Redwood individually, and it told exactly the same story. But one thing to point out is that Redwood for sure is outpacing Douglas fir in terms of growth across the board, even in the control, and with a lot more variability. And I don't exactly know what's causing that variability. It's probably because we thinned out some of the sprouts, and that might be doing it, but I'm not too sure. When you look at mean annual increment versus periodic annual increment, periodic annual increment is, at least in the thinnings, we're at least, well, up to 2 times higher than that of mean annual increment, so that we could say that we are pretty successful in delaying culmination of mean annual increment, which means that these stands should be growing a lot more productively than that of the control, which is really close to culmination and is really sad. So enough with data, let's look at some pictures. So this is what the low thinning at 80% retention looks like. So we clearly didn't remove a lot of trees out of the canopy. But even though we didn't remove a lot of trees from the canopy and growth wasn't maximized, we still got a lot of understory response, so definitely species are starting to come back. This is the low thinning with the 45% retention. So definitely we're thinning it hard enough from below that we're actually starting to get into the codominant trees. The 5 year after picture was actually taken with leaf off, because when we got there, we kind of scoped the area out the year before, and when leaf was on, you couldn't see anything. It was just completely green. So we had to get out there before bud broke. Here's the crown thinning at 80% retention. So 80% retention, we're by virtue of crown thinning, we're taking out fewer but larger trees, so we're punching larger holes into the canopy, and clearly we're getting much more of a response in terms of the understory. And then this is at the 45% retention. It looks a lot like the crown thinning at the 45% retention. And again, we had to take this picture before it completely leafed out. So in summary, pretty much no action is not a good alternative for the park when managing our forest. Redwood and Douglas fir both responded pretty well, particularly at the higher severity thinnings. Generally, if you're going to be cutting down a few trees, if we're going to be afraid to cut down a few trees, I say use the crown thinning because it's a little bit more effective. And mainly because when you're thinning from below and you're taking out these suppressed trees, you're not really giving any more growing space to the trees that you're trying to release. In the crown thinning, you're creating gaps so that the trees that you're trying to release actually have lateral growing space to grow into. And also that this study kind of demonstrates the power of thinning on very short scales. I mean, we're having a lot of effects in only 5 minutes. Man, I better slow down, huh? Over very short periods of time. How was lunch, guys? Was lunch good? Anyways, this is only 5-year data. And again, like I said, we're just starting to scratch the surface of the data. And much more analysis needs to be done, especially on growth. There's a lot of ways to try to tackle these growth to growing stock type of questions. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of that from Lynn in the next talk. We haven't really looked at, empirically anyways, understory and overstory species compositions. That's something that we really want to look at. But we kind of designed this so that you can look at all that stuff. So we collected a lot of data out there, including regeneration, what's coming in 5 years later. We're following overstory, we're following understory, we're looking at all the species, we're ocularly estimating cover. And also, prior to treatment, we stem mapped every single tree in the plot. So, I mean, there might be some opportunities to look at how spatial pattern is influencing growth. And the 10-year measurement is going to be coming up in less than 2 years. So if you're a graduate student, or if you're planning on being a graduate student and you want a cool project, hit me up. I think I got one for you. All right, that's all I got for you guys. Oh, you know what? I'm going to leave you with this picture here. This is actually the crown thinning with the 45% retention. So it's a more severe crown thinning. Thank you.
All right, we already have our first question asked.
Do I only get one question? I got about a dozen for you.
We got time.
Okay. So when you were selecting for your crown thinning, like at the 45% level, did you intentionally favor removing Douglas fir where they were next to redwood, or was it more random?
Very definitely. Yeah, we were trying to thin first around the clumps. Or if there was a redwood to release, we would take a dominant or co-dominant Douglas fir right next to it.
So you would remove a dominant to release, say, an intermediate, or just to favor?
No, we're really trying to stay true to the prescription. So if we're taking a co-dominant or a dominant, we're trying to release a dominant or a co-dominant.
Okay. And so with this work you've done, do you think you have a good feel for what the sweet spot is? What percentage and what percentage of the thinning from below versus the crown thinning?
Not yet. No.
That's what makes it fun.
But yeah.
Is there any significant difference in the financial cost of one type of treatment versus the other?
Yeah. That's a good question. We actually hired contractors to do crown thinning on a large scale. And I actually asked them that. I said, hey, look, here's a project that another contractor did, and here's a project that you guys did. One was a low thinning, and then the other one was a crown thinning, and I don't think it made a difference. They said, we don't care what you have us cut down, it's all going to cost the same per acre. So I don't know. That was just one contractor that we talked to.
Jason, what are you doing with the material? Is this lop and scatter, or what is
I'm sorry.
in here?
Yeah, so this particular project was all lop and scattered.
All right, hold on, Mr. Abel.
Back to the cost, did they use mechanical shears and stuff to operate this, or was it hand?
It was all chainsaw.
All chainsaws?
Yeah.
And did you have all the skid roads and everything all?
No, but, you know, it wasn't, we didn't remove the biomass. We didn't, it was all lop and scatter. So we left it all on the ground.
Was the infrastructure for the logging all in place? The skid roads, the...
Was it still there when we went out and did it?
Could they lead the timber to the skid roads? If they could, then probably it didn't make any difference what you did in terms of their costs.
But I'm not getting the question. So
The technique of logging, it would probably have nullified any differences in logging. The key is how they fall the timber would be the key to their costs. It also would result in less damage to your residual.
okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, but again, it doesn't really necessarily apply to us for this particular treatment because we didn't remove any of the timber. You know what I mean?
Oh, you just felled the tree.
Yes.
Hi, church, wrong pew.
Okay, this is one more question. All right, back there, and just remember, there's lots of seats up front.
See if I get the best talk to get some more questions.
Where did these plots land on the spectrum of bear damage?
Wait, I didn't hear it.
Where did these plots land on the spectrum of bear damage in that area?
Oh, I think it was like in the 5% average. I think it was 5% of the mortality was bear damage. It was a little bit higher in the higher intensities, for sure.
Okay.
Excellent job, Jason. Thank you very much.
Thank you.